Chapter 6. Nicky stepped into the rooftop bar of the Soho house and wondered what her friend had been thinking when she booked outdoor cocktails during a heat wave. 7:30 on a weeknight in summer was too light out to feel cool and too early for any action, especially on this stretch of 9th Avenue. In the hipper-than-thou meatpacking district, 7:30 was beyond outre. It was downright early bird. Lauren Perry, who clearly wasn't bothered by any of that, flagged her from her street view table where the canopy ended and the pool area began. "Is this too hot?" she said when Nicky arrived. "No, this is fine." After they hugged, she added, "Who couldn't stand to sweat off a few pounds?" "Well, sorry. I spend my day in the morgue," said the medical examiner. "I grab all the warm I can get." They ordered cocktails. Nicky went for Campari and soda, craving something dry, sparkling, and most of all cold. Her friend stuck with her usual, a Bloody Mary. When it came, Nicky observed that it was an ironic favorite for a corner. "Why don't you break out, Lauren? This isn't Sunday brunch. Get one of those sake teenies or a sex on the beach." "Hey, you want to talk ironic drinks? That would be it. In my line of work, sex on the beach is usually what led to the body under the pier." "To life," said Nicky, and they both laughed. Meeting her friend for a drink after work once a week was more than just cocktails and chill time. The two women had hit it off right away over Lauren's first autopsy, when she started at the ME's office 3 years ago, but their weekly after-work ritual was really fueled by their professional bond. Despite cultural differences, Lauren came out of the projects in St. Louis and Nicky grew up in Manhattan middle class, they connected on another level, as professional women navigating traditional male fields. Sure, Nicky enjoyed her occasional brew at the precinct-adjacent cop bar, but she was never about being one of the fellas, any more than she was about quilting bees or goddess book clubs. She and Lauren clung to their camaraderie and the sense of safety they had crafted with each other, to have a time and place to share problems at work, largely political, and yes, to decompress and let their hair down without having it be in a meat market or at a stitch and bitch. Nicky asked, "Mind a little shop talk?" "Hey, sister, on top of being cold all day, the people I hang out with don't do much talking, so whatever the subject, bring it." Heat wanted to discuss Matthew Starr. She told Lauren she now understood how the victim got those torso bruises. She bullet-pointed her sessions with Merrick and Pachenko, concluding by saying she had no doubt the bookie had his muscle man encourage the real estate developer to prioritize the repayment of his gambling debt. With experience talking, she added that thanks to lawyers and stonewalling, good luck making a case. What she wanted to know was if Lauren recalled any other marks that might be read as a separate event from the Russians' workover. Lauren Perry was a marvel. She remembered every autopsy the way Tiger Woods could tell you every golf shot he made in every tournament, as well as his opponents. She said there were only 2 relevant indicators. First, a pair of uniquely shaped contusions on the deceased back, an exact match to the polished brass flip handles on the French doors leading to the balcony, probably where he was pushed outside with great force. Heat recalled Roach's tour of the balcony crime scene and the powdered stone under the spot where the door handles had impacted the wall. And second, Starr had grip marks on both upper arms. The medical examiner air-demoed a thumb in each armpit, hands wrapped around the arms. "My guess is it wasn't much of a fight," said Lauren. "Whoever did this picked up the victim, slammed him through those doors, and then tossed him backwards to the street. I examined his legs and ankles closely, and I'm certain Mr. Starr never even touched the railing when he went over." "No other chafing or cuts, no defensive wounds or marks?" Lauren shook her head. "Although there was one irregularity." "Out with it, girl. Next inconsistency, irregularity is the detective's best friend." "I was detailing those punch bruises, you know, the ones with the probable ring mark, and there was one that was an exact match for the others, but no ring mark." "Maybe he took it off? In the middle of a beating?" Nicky took a long pull on her drink, feeling the carbonation bite her tongue as she stared through the plexi barrier outside her at the avenues 7 floors below. She didn't know what Lauren's information meant, but she got out her notebook and made a note. 1 punch, no ring. They ordered some arancini and a plate of olives, and by the time their finger foods arrived, they were on to other subjects. Lauren was teaching a seminar at Columbia in the fall. Her dachshund, Lola, got picked for a dog food commercial when she took her to the dog run last weekend. Nicky had a week off at the end of August and was thinking of Iceland, and did Lauren want to come? "Sounds cold," she said. But she also said she'd think about it. Nicky's cell phone vibed and she looked at the caller ID. "What's up, Detective?" Lauren asked. "Are you going to have to deploy or something? Maybe rappel down the face of the building and spring into some two-fisted action?" "Rook," was all she said, and held up the phone. "Take it, I don't mind." "It's Rook," she reiterated, as if it required no further explanation. Nicky let his call drop to voicemail. "Forward him to my phone," said Lauren, stirring her Bloody Mary. "You could do worse than Jameson Rook. That man is doable." "Oh, sure, that's just what I need. The ride-along isn't bad enough without putting that in the mix." When her phone pulsed to indicate voicemail, she pressed the button for a fetch and held the phone to her ear. "Huh. He says he's come upon something big about the Matthew Starr case and needs me to see it." She held up a staying palm to Lauren as she listened to the rest and then hung up. "What's the development?" "Didn't say. He said he couldn't talk now, but to come to his place right away, and left his address." "You should go," said Lauren. "I'm almost afraid to. Knowing him, he's probably made citizens' arrests of anybody who knew Matthew Starr." When the industrial strength elevator reached his loft, Rook was waiting for her on the other side of the accordion mesh doors. "Heat, you actually came." "Your message said you had something to show me." "I do," he said, and strode from the entry and disappeared around a corner. "This way." She followed him into his designer kitchen. At the other end of it, in the great room, as the cable designer shows call those open spaces that merge living rooms and dining rooms, often overlooking kitchen, there was a poker table, a real poker table with a felt top. And it was surrounded by poker players. She came to a halt. "Rook, there's nothing you need to show me here about the case at all, is there?" "Say you are a detective, aren't you?" He shrugged and gave a little impish grin. "Would you have come if I just plain invited you to play poker?" Nicky got hit with a major turnaround twinge, but then the poker crowd rose to greet her, and there she was. As Rook escorted her into the room, he said, "If you really, really need a work reason to be here, you can thank the man who got you your warrant for the Guilford. Judge, this is Detective Nicky Heat, NYPD." Judge Simpson looked a bit different in a yellow polo shirt, hunkered behind tall stacks of poker chips instead of his bench. "I'm winning," he said as he shook her hand. A network news anchor she and the rest of America admired was also there, with her filmmaker husband. The anchor woman said she was glad a cop was there because she had been robbed. "And by a judge," said her husband. Rook placed Nicky in the empty seat between him and the newswoman, and before Nicky knew it, the anchor's Oscar-winning husband was dealing her a hand. It was a low-stakes game, she was relieved to discover, and then that turned to worry. They had lowered the ante in deference to her pay grade. But it was clear that this was more about fun than money. Although winning still mattered, especially to the judge. Seeing him out of his robe for the first time, the overhead light shining on his bald head, the manic obsession he brought to his play, Nicky couldn't shake the comparison to another Simpson. She would have given up a whole pot just to hear the judge say, "Do!" After the deal of the third hand, the lights dipped out and came back up. "Here we go," said Nicky. "Mayor said we'd be having rolling brownouts." "How many days is it for this heat wave?" asked the filmmaker. "This is day 4, said his wife. "I interviewed a meteorologist, and he said it's not a heat wave unless it's 3 consecutive days above 90 degrees. A woman appeared in the kitchen and added, "And if the heat lasts more than 4 days, consult your doctor immediately." The room burst into laughter, and the woman stepped from behind the counter, taking a deep, theatrical bow, complete with a graceful upward arm sweep. Rook had told her about his mother. Of course, she already knew who Margaret was. You don't win Tony Awards and show up in the style section and Vanity Fair party collages as often as she did and go unnoticed. In her 60s now, Margaret had gone from the ingenue to the grande dame, although Rook once confided Nicky that his spelling was Grand D-A-M-N. The lady exuded every bit of the joyful diva, from her opening line to the way she entered the great room to take Nicky's hand and fuss about how very much she had heard about her from Jamie. "And I've heard a lot about you," Nicky replied. Believe it all, darling, and if it's not true, when I get to hell I'll sort it out there." Then she swept. No, there is no more accurate way to describe it. She swept back into the kitchen. Rook smiled at Nicky. "As you can see, I believe in truth in advertising." "So I'm learning." She heard ice plinking in a rocks glass and saw Margaret uncapping a bottle of Jameson. Yes, she thought, I'm learning a lot, Jameson Rook. The news anchor appealed to Rook's sense of civic responsibility, and he killed his air conditioning. Nicky looked up from her cards, and her eyes followed his shorts and U2 3D T-shirt as he moved barefoot across the oriental rug to the far wall. He bent to open the sash windows that gave onto his penthouse view of Tribeca, and when Nicky's eyes drifted off him, it was to the hulk of a distant building, River Star in the Hudson, backlit by Jersey City. The structure was dark, except for the red aviation lamp atop an idle crane balanced above girders awaiting skin. They'd wait a long time. Margaret took her son's chair beside Nicky and said, "It is a very good view," and as Rook bent to open the next window, the doyenne leaned in to whisper, "I'm his mother, and even I think it's a great view, but that's just me taking credit." And then, just to be clear, "Jamie got my ass. It got a marvelous review in old Calcutta." 2 hours later, after Rook, then the news anchor, and then her husband folded, Nicky won yet another hand against the judge. Simpson said he didn't care, but judging from his expression, she was glad she got the court order out of him before the poker game. "Guess the cards aren't falling my way tonight for some reason." She really wanted him to just say, "Go!" "It isn't the cards, Horace," said Rook. "For once somebody at this table can read your tells." He got up and crossed to the counter to peel a tepid slice of Ray's out of the box and fish another fat tire from the ice in the sink. "Now, to me, tonight anyway, you've got a great poker face. I can't see what's going on behind the taciturn judicial mask. It could be woohoo or yay boo. But this one here, she's got you." Rook took his seat again, and Nicky wondered if the whole pizza and beer run had been a ruse to move his chair closer to hers. "My face gives nothing away," said the judge. "It's not about you giving it away, it's what she's taking," said Rook. He turned to her as he spoke to the judge. "I've been with her weeks now, and I don't think I've ever known someone so adept at reading people." He held that look to her, and although they were nowhere close to breathing each other's exhalations like they had on Star's balcony that day, she felt a flutter. So she turned away to rake in the pot, wondering what the hell she was playing with here, and she didn't mean the cards. "I think I should call it a night," she said. Rook insisted on walking her down to the sidewalk, but Nicky stalled until they were embedded in the group departure of the other guests so she could get away clean. A group seemed the perfect place to fulfill that, because the truth of it, she reflected on the ride down, was that she didn't want so much to be alone as not to be paired up. Not tonight, anyway, she thought. The news anchor and her husband lived in walking distance and made their exit just as Simpson flagged a cab. The judge was heading uptown near the Guggenheim and asked if Nicky wanted to share the ride. She sorted her feelings about leaving Rook hangdogging on the sidewalk versus staying and having to deal with the awkwardness of the good-night moment, or worse, the come-back-up moment, and answered yes. Rook said, "Hope you don't mind I sort of punked you into coming over." "Why would I mind? I'm leaving with money, jokey boy." Then she slid way across the taxi seat to make room for Simpson. 10 minutes later, she was unlocking her lobby door in the Gramercy Park, thinking about a bath. Nobody would accuse Nicky Heat of leading a life of indulgence. Delayed gratification was a phrase that came to her mind often, usually invoked as a means to talk herself down off some rare flash of anger at what she was doing instead of what she would rather be doing, or saw other people doing. So as she ran the tap to revitalize the bubbles in her tub, allowing herself one of her few indulgences, a bubble bath, her mind ran back to thoughts of the road not taken. To Connecticut, and a yard, and the PTA, and a husband who took the train to Manhattan, and having the time and resources to get a massage once in a while, Or maybe take a yoga class. Yoga class instead of close-quarter combat training. Nikki tried to imagine herself in bed with the ropey tofu advocate with a Johnny Depp beard and a random acts of kindness bumper sticker on a rusted-out Saab, instead of sheet grappling with the ex-SEAL. She could do worse than Johnny Depp, and had. A couple of times that evening, she had thought about calling Don, but didn't. Why not? She wanted to boast about her perfect armbar takedown of Pushenko at the subway station. Quick and easy. Take a seat, sir. But that wasn't why she wanted to call him, and she knew it. So why didn't she? It was an easy arrangement with Don. Her trainer with benefits never asked her where she was or when she'd be back or why she didn't call. His place or hers didn't matter. It was logistical, whichever was closer. He was looking neither to nest nor to get away from anything. And the sex was good. Once in a while he would get a bit too aggressive or a bit too into task completion, but she knew how to work with that and get what she needed. And how much different was that from the commuter guys, the Noah Paxtons of the world? The Don thing wasn't the be-all, but it worked fine. So why didn't she call? She shut off the tap when the bubbles tickled her chin and inhaled the scent of her childhood. Nikki thought about the delays, tried to imagine fulfilling purpose instead of needs, and wondered if this was what it would be like in, say, 11 years, when she hit 40. That used to seem like such a long way off. And yet the last 10 years, a full decade of rearranging her life around the end of her mother's, had blipped along like a TiVo on forward. Or was that for the lack of savoring? She went from convincing her mother that she should be a theater arts major to transferring to the College of Criminal Justice. She wondered if, without realizing it, she was getting too tough to be happy. She knew she did less laughing and more judging. What did Rook said at the poker game? He called her adept at reading people. Not what she wanted on her tombstone. Rook. Okay, so I was checking out his ass, she thought. Then the flutter came over her. Probably embarrassment at being transparent enough to be caught in the act by the Grand Dame. Nikki submerged under the bubbles and held her breath until the pounding of her flutter got lost in the pounding of oxygen debt. She broke the surface and palmed the suds off her face and hair and floated, weightless in the cooling water, and let herself wonder what it would be like with Jameson Rook. What would he be like? How would he feel and taste and move? And then the flutter hit her again. What would she be like with him? It made her nervous. She didn't know. It was a mystery. She unstopped the drain and got out. Nikki had her air conditioning off and walked her apartment naked and wet, not bothering to towel off in the humidity. The die-hard soap bubbles felt good on her skin, and besides, once she dried off she'd be damp in no time in the soggy air, so why not be damp and smell like lavender? Only 2 of her windows gave views to facing neighbors, and since there was no breeze to obstruct anyway, she drew the shades down on them and went to the utility closet off the kitchen. Detective Nikki Heat's miracle time and money saver was to press her own clothes the night before. Nothing stopped the crooks in their tracks more than defined pleats and sharp creases. She drew the board down on its hinge and plugged in the iron. She hadn't overdone the alcohol that night, but what she had drunk had made her thirsty. In the fridge she found her last can of lemon-lime seltzer. It was quite ungreen of her, but she held open the refrigerator door and moved herself close to it, feeling the cool air cascade out against her naked body, chilling her skin into gooseflesh. A small click turned her away from the open door. The red light had popped on, indicating the iron was ready. She set the can of seltzer on the counter and hurried to her closet to find something relatively clean and, above all, breathable. Her navy linen blazer only needed a touch-up. Walking in the hall with it, though, she noticed that a button on the right sleeve was cracked, and she paused to look at it, to remember if she had a match. And then, from the kitchen, Nikki heard the seltzer can open. Chapter 7. Even as she stood frozen in her hallway, Nikki's first thought was that she hadn't really heard it. Too many replays of her mother's murder had embedded that pop-top sound in her head. How many times Had that snap hiss jolted her out of nightmares, or made her flinch in the break room? No, she could not have heard it. That's what she told herself in the eternal second she stood there, cotton-mouthed and naked, straining to hear over the damned night noise of New York City and her own pulse. Her fingers hurt from digging the broken sleeve button into herself. She relaxed her grip, but didn't drop the blazer for fear of making noise that would give her away. To whom? Give it 1 minute, she told herself. Stay still. Be a statue for a count of 60 and be done with this. She cursed herself for her nakedness and how vulnerable it made her feel. Indulged in the bubble bath, and now look. Stop that and focus, she thought. Just focus and listen to every square inch of the night. Maybe it was a neighbor. How many times had she heard lovemaking and coughing and dishes stacking come across the airspace into her open windows? The windows, they were all open. A mere fraction through her minute. She lifted one bare foot off the runner and set it down 1 step closer to the kitchen. She listened. Nothing. Nicky chanced another slow-mo step. In the middle of it, her heart skipped when a shadow moved across the slice of floor she could see in the kitchen. She didn't hesitate or stop to listen again. She bolted. Racing past the kitchen door to the living room, Nicky hit the light switch, killing the one lamp that was on, and lunged for her desk. Her hand landed inside the large Tuscan bowl that lived there on the back corner. It was empty. Looking for this? Pachenko filled the archway, and he was holding up her off-duty piece. The bright kitchen light behind him cast him in silhouette, but she could see that the Sig Sauer was still in its holster, as if the arrogant bastard wouldn't be needing it, at least not yet. Confronted by facts, the detective did what she always did. Pushed fear aside and got practical. Nicky ran a checklist of options. 1, she could scream. The windows were open, but he might start shooting, which for the moment he didn't seem inclined to do. 2, get a weapon. Her backup gun was in her handbag in the kitchen or the bedroom. She wasn't sure which. Either way, she would have to get past him. 3, buy time. She needed it to improvise a weapon, to escape, or to take him out. If she had been confronting a hostage situation, she would have used conversation. Engage, humanize, slow the clock. How did you find me? Good, she thought. To her ear, she didn't sound afraid. What, you think you're the only ones who know how to tail somebody? Nicky took a small step backward to draw him into the room and away from the hall. She retraced the places she had been since she had left the precinct. Soho House, Rook's poker game, and got a chill realizing this man had been watching her each stop. It's not hard to follow someone who doesn't know they have a tail. You should know that. And how do you know that? She took another step backward. This time he moved with her a step. Were you a cop in Russia? Pachenko laughed. Sort of, but not for police. Hey, stay there. He took the cig out and tossed the holster aside like litter. I don't want to have to shoot you. And then he added, not till I'm through. Game changer, she said to herself, and prepared for the worst option. Nicky had drilled the handgun disarm only 1,000,000 times, but always on a mat with an instructor or cop partner. Still, he thought of herself as an athlete, in constant training, and had run it only 2 weeks ago. As she choreographed the moves in her head, she kept talking. You've got balls coming here without your own gun. I won't need it. Today you tricked me. Not so tonight, you'll see. He reached for the light switch when he turned, and this time she took a step toward him. When the lamp came on, he looked at her and said, Daddy-like. He made a show of looking her body up and down. Ironically, Nicky had felt more violated by him that afternoon in interrogation when she had her clothes on. Still, she folded her arms over herself. Cover all you want. I told you I'd have it, and I will. He took stock. Pachenko was one-handing her gun, a plus since he had strength on her. He also had size, but she knew from his subway takedown that he was big but not quick. But then he had the gun. Come here, he said, and took a step to her. The conversation phase was over. She hesitated and took a step toward him. Her heart thudded, and she could hear her own pulse. This would all be a blink if it came off. She felt like she was on a high dive, about to initiate a plunge, and the thought made her heart race more. She remembered the uniform in the Bronx who'd botched this last year and lost half his face. Nicky decided that wasn't helping and focused herself again, visualizing her moves. "Bitch, when I say come here, come here." He brought the gun up level with her chest. She moved the step closer that he wanted and that she needed, and as she did, she raised her hands in submission, quaking them slightly so their small movements would not telegraph the big one when it came. And when it came, it had to be lightning. "Just don't shoot me, okay? Please don't shoot." In one motion, she brought her left hand up and clamped it on top of the gun, wedging her thumb on the hammer while she pushed it away and slipped in and to his right. She hooked her foot between his and threw her shoulder against his arm while she wrenched the gun up and around toward him. As she yanked it to point at him, she heard his finger break as it twisted in the trigger guard, and he cried out. Then it got messy. She tried to pull the gun away, but his broken finger was hung up in the guard, and when it finally jerked free, the gun had such momentum it slipped out of her hand and across the rug. Pachenko grabbed her by the hair and threw her toward the foyer. Nicky tried to gain her feet and get to the front door, but he lunged for her. He grabbed one of her forearms, but it didn't hold. His hands were sweaty and she was slick from the bubble bath. Nicky slid out of his grip and twirled, shooting the heel of her other hand up into his nose. She heard a crack and he swore in Russian. Torquing herself, she raised her foot to chest kick him back into the living room. Buddy had his hands up to the twin trails of blood coming from his broken nose, and her kick glanced off his forearm. When he reached for her, she fired 2 rapid lefts to his nose, and while he dealt with that, she turned to flip the deadbolts on her front door and screamed, "Help! Fire! Fire!" Sadly, the surest way to motivate citizens to make a 911 call. The boxer in Pachenko came alive. He landed a hard left to her back that smacked her flat against the door. Her advantage was speed and movement, and Nicky used it, dropping so that his next shot, a left to her head, missed, and he smashed his fist into the wood. While she was down, she rolled right through his ankles, sweeping his legs from under him and sending him face first into the door. While he was down, she broke for the living room, looking for the fallen gun. It had taken a bounce under the desk, and the time it took her to find it was too much time. Just as Nicky bent for it, Pachenko bear-hugged her from behind and picked her up off the floor, kicking and punching air. He put his mouth to her ear and said, "You're mine now, bitch." Pachenko carried her to the hallway leading to the bedroom, but Nicky wasn't done. At the passage to the kitchen, she splayed out her arms and legs and hooked them on the corners. It was like hitting the brakes, and as his head whiplashed forward, she shot hers back and felt a sharp pain when his front teeth broke against the back of her skull. He cursed again and flung her onto the kitchen floor, where he pounced on top of her, pinning her with his body. This was the nightmare outcome, letting him get his full weight on her. Nicky jerked and twisted, but he had gravity working for him now. He let go of her left wrist, but it was only to free the hand without the broken finger to clamp around her throat. With one hand free, she pushed at his chin, but he didn't budge, and his grip tightened on her neck. Blood dripped off his nose and chin onto her face, waterboarding her. She flailed her head side to side and took swipes at him with her right hand, but his choke was sapping her strength. Fog crept into the edges of her vision. Above her, Pachenko's determined face became dappled by a shower of tiny shooting stars. He was taking his time, watching her lungs slowly lose oxygen, feeling her weaken, seeing her head flails become less rapid. Nicky rolled her face to the side so she wouldn't have to look at him. She thought of her mother, murdered 3 feet away on this very floor, calling her name, and as blackness drew over her, Nicky thought how sad that she had no name to call for. And that is when she saw the cord. Lung-searing, strength-draining, Nicky fumbled for the dangling wire. After 2 failed swipes, she snagged it, and the iron crashed down off the board. If Pachenko cared, he didn't show it, and probably took it as the last thrashing of the bitch. But then he felt the hot sear of the iron on the side of his face. His scream was like no animal Nicky had heard. As his hand came off her neck, the air she gulped tasted of his burning flesh. She brought the iron up again, this time in a hard swing. The hot edge of it hit his left eye. He screamed again, and his scream mixed with the sirens pulling up to her building. Pachenko struggled to his feet and stumbled toward the kitchen door, holding his face, bouncing off the corner of the entryway. He recovered and lumbered out. By the time she pulled herself up and made it to the living room, Nicky could hear his heavy footsteps clanging up the fire escape toward the roof. He grabbed her cig and climbed the metal steps to the roof, but he was long gone. Emergency lights strobed off the brick fronts on her street, and another approaching siren triple burped through the intersection at 3rd Avenue. She remembered she had no clothes on, and decided she had better go back down and put something on. When Nicky came into her bullpen the next morning, after her meeting with the captain, Rook and Roach were waiting there for her. Ochoa was leaning back in his chair with his ankles crossed on his desk and said, "So last night I watched the Yankees win and had sex with the wife. Can anybody top that?" "Beats my night," said Rayleigh. "What about you, Detective Heath?" She shrugged, playing along. "Just some poker and a little workout at home. Not as exciting as you, Ochoa. Your wife actually had sex with you?" Cop humor, dark and laced with sideways affection only. "Oh, I see," said Rook. "This is how you people deal. Attempt on my life? No biggie, too cool for school." "No, we pretty much don't give a shit. She's a big girl," Ochoa said. And the cops laughed. "Put that in your research, writer boy." Rook approached Heat. "I'm surprised you came in this morning." "Why? This is where I work. Not going to catch any bad guys at home." "Clearly," said Ochoa. "Nailed it," Rayleigh said to his partner. "Thank you for not high-fiving," she said. Even though the precinct, and by now most of the cop shops in 5 boroughs, knew about her home invasion, Nicky recapped her first-hand highlights for them, and they listened intently, with sober expressions. "Bold," said Rook, "going after a cop. And in her own home. Guy must be psycho. I thought so yesterday." "Or," said Heat, deciding to share the feeling she'd been harboring since she saw Pachenko in her living room holding her gun, "or maybe somebody sent him to get me out of the way. Who knows?" "We'll bag this bastard," said Rayleigh. "Spoil his day." "Damn straight," from Ochoa. "On top of the all points, we've notified hospitals to be on alert for anybody whose face is only half pressed." "Cap said you guys already gave Myrick an early wake-up call." Ochoa nodded. "At dark 30, dude sleeps in a nightshirt." He shook his head at the vision and continued, "Anyway, Myrick claims no contact with Pachenko since they got sprung yesterday. We've got surveillance on him and a warrant for his phone records." "And a tap on his incomings," added Rayleigh. "Plus we have some blue jeans from both Myrick's and Pachenko's apartments in the lab now. Your Russian pal had a couple of promising rips on the knees, but it's hard to know what's fashion and what's wear and tear. Forensics will know." Nicky smiled. "And on the upside, I may have a match for those grip marks on Star's upper arms." She opened her collar and showed the red marks on her neck. "I knew it. I knew it was Pachenko who threw him off that balcony." "For once, Rook, I'd take that guess, but let's not jump there yet. The minute you start closing doors this early in an investigation is the minute you start missing something," said the detective. "Roach, go run a check on overnight retail robberies. If Pachenko's on the run and can't go to his apartment, he'll be improvising. Pay special attention to pharmacies and medical supply stores. He didn't go to an ER, so he might be doing some self-care." After Roach left for their assignment, and as Nicky was downloading a report from the forensic accountants, the desk sergeant brought in a package that had been delivered to her, a flat box the size and weight of a hallway mirror. "I'm not expecting anything," said Nicky. "Maybe it's from Elmira," said the sergeant. "Maybe it's Russian caviar," he added with a deadpan look, and then left. "Not the most sentimental crowd," said Rook. Thank God. She looked at the shipping label. "It's from the Met Museum store." She got scissors from her desk, opened the box, and peeked inside. "It's a framed something." Nicky drew the framed something out of the box and discovered what it was, and when she did, whatever darkness she had carried into that morning after gave way to soft golden sunlight, breaking across her face in the reflected glow of 2 girls in white play dresses lighting Chinese lanterns in the gloaming of carnation, lily, rose. She stared at the print and then turned herself to Rook, who stood frowning beside her. "There should be a card somewhere. It says, 'Guess who?' By the way, you'd better guess me or I'll be massively pissed I sprung for next day delivery." She looked back at the print. "It's just so—" "I know. I saw it on your face yesterday in Star's living room. Little did I know when I called in my order it would be a get-well gift. Well, actually, more like a glad you didn't get killed last night gift." She laughed so he wouldn't notice the small quiver that had come to her lower lip. Then Nicky turned away from him. "I'm getting a little glare right under this light," she said, and all he saw was her back. At noon, she shouldered her bag, and when Rook stood to go with her, she told him to get himself some lunch. She needed to go on this one by herself. He told her she should have some protection. "I'm a cop. I am the protection." He read her determination to go solo, and for once didn't argue. On her drive to Midtown, Nicky felt guilty for ditching him. Hadn't he welcomed her to his poker table and given her that gift? Sure, he bugged her sometimes in the ride-alongs, but this was different. It could have been the ordeal of her night and the aching fatigue she was carrying, but it wasn't. Whatever the hell Nicky Heat was feeling, what the feeling needed was space. "Sorry about the mess," said Noah Paxton. He threw the remains of his deli-tossed salad into the trash can and wiped off his blotter with a napkin. "I wasn't expecting you." "I was in the neighborhood," said Detective Heat. She didn't care if he knew she was lying, and her experience dropping in on witnesses unexpectedly brought unexpected results. People with their guard down were less careful, and she learned more. That afternoon she wanted a couple of things out of Noah, the first being his unguarded reaction to seeing the photo array from the Guilford again. "Are there new pictures in here?" "No," she said as she dealt the last one in front of him. "You're sure you don't recognize any of them?" Nicky made it sound casual, but asking if he was sure put pressure on. This was about cross-checking Kimberly's reason he hadn't identified Myrick. As he had the day before, Paxton gave a slow and methodical pass over each shot and said he didn't recognize any of them. She took away all the photos but two, Myrick and Pochenko. "What about these? Anything?" He shrugged and shook no. "Sorry. Who are they?" "These two are interesting, that's all." Detective Heat was in the business of getting answers, not giving them, unless there was an advantage. "I also wanted to ask you about Matthew's gambling. How did he pay for that?" "With cash." "Money you gave him?" "His money, yes." "And when he went in the hole to bookmakers, how did that get repaid?" "Same way, with cash." "Would they come to you for it? The bookies, I mean?" "Oh, hell no. I told Matthew if he chose to deal with that level of person, that's his business. I didn't want them coming here." He shivered for emphasis. "No, thanks." She'd backdoored him, but had her answer. Kimberly's reason the money man didn't know the bookie checked. Heat then asked him about Morgan Donnelly, the woman whose name Kimberly had given her, she of the intercepted love letter. Paxton verified Donnelly had worked there and was their top marketing executive. He also verified that the two had a hidden office affair that was hidden to no one, and described at great length how the staff would refer to Matthew and Morgan as M.M. Morgan earned a few nicknames of her own, he said. The two that won the office pool were Top Performer and Chief Asset. "One more piece of business and I'll get out of your hair. I got the report this morning from the forensic accountants." She took the file out of her bag and watched his brow fall. "They told me you were no Bernie Madoff, which is, I guess, what we needed to make sure of." "Makes sense." Quite nonchalant, but the detective knew guilt when she saw it, and it was clinging to his face. "There was one irregularity in your accounting." She handed him the page with the spreadsheet and summary and watched him tense. "Well?" He put the page down. "My attorney would advise me not to answer. Do you feel you need an attorney to answer my question, Mr. Paxton?" She could see her squeeze work on him. "It was my only ethical breach," he said. "All these years, the only one." Nicky just looked and waited. Nothing screamed louder than silence. "I hid money. I created a series of transactions to funnel a large sum to a private account. I was hiding a portion of Matthew Starr's private funds for his son's college education. I saw how fast it was going, to gambling and hookers. I'm just a functionary, but I was heartsick about what was happening to that family. For their own good, I hid money so Matty Jr. could go to college." Matthew discovered it, same way drunks can find bottles, and raided it. Kimberly is almost as bad as he was. I think you have a good idea how she likes to spend." I got that impression. The wardrobe, the jewelry, the vacations, the cars, the surgeries, plus she was hiding money. Of course I spotted it. Much like your forensics guys, the numbers talk if you know what you're looking for. Among other things, she had a love nest, a 2-bedroom spot on Columbus. I told her to get rid of it, and when she asked why, I told her because they were broke. How did she react? Devastated doesn't begin to cover it. I guess you could say she freaked. And when did you tell her all this? He looked at the calendar under the glass on his desktop. 10 days ago? Detective Heat nodded, reflecting. 10 days. A week before her husband was murdered. Chapter 8. When Detective Heat nosed the Crown Vic out of the underground parking at Star Point Tower, she heard the low, steady thrum that could only mean helicopters, and rolled her window down. 3 of them hovered to her left about a quarter-mile west on the far side of the Time Warner building. The lower one, she knew, would be the police chopper. The 2 deferential ones at higher altitude would belong to TV stations. "Breaking news," she said to her empty car. She dialed in the tactical band on her radio, and before long put together that a steam pipe had blown and geysered, further evidence that the ancient Gotham infrastructure was no match for nature's oven. Almost a week of the big heat, and Manhattan was starting to bubble and blister like a cheese pizza. Columbus Circle would be impossible, so she took the longer but faster route back to the precinct, entering Central Park across from the plaza and taking its East Drive north. The city kept the park closed to motor vehicles until 3, so without traffic, her ride had a Sunday in the country feel. Lovely as long as she blasted the air conditioner. Sawhorses blocked the drive at 71st, but the auxiliary cop recognized her car as an unmarked and slid the barrier with a wave. Nicky pulled to a stop beside her. "Who'd you piss off to get this duty?" "Must be karma from a past life," said the uniform with a laugh. Nicky looked at the unopened bottle of cold water sweating in her cup holder and passed it to the woman. "Stay cool, officer," she said, and drove on. The heat tamped everything down. Aside from a handful of certifiable runners and insane cyclists, the park had been left to the birds and squirrels. Nicky slowed as she passed the back of the Metropolitan Museum, and looking at the sloped glass wall of the mezzanine, she smiled, as she always did, at her classic movie memory of Harry in there with Sally, teaching her how to tell a waiter there was too much pepper on the paprikash. A young couple ambled across the lawn, hand in hand, and without deciding to, Nicky stopped the car and watched the 2 of them, simply together, with all the time in the world. When a ripple of melancholy stirred in her, she pushed it down with a slow press of the gas pedal. Time to get back to work. Rook sprang up from her desk chair when Nicky came into the bullpen. It was clear he was waiting for her to get back and wanted to know where she'd gone, meaning, without saying it, "Why didn't you bring me?" When she told him it was to follow up with Noah Paxton, Rook didn't get any more relaxed or much less obvious. "You know, I get it, that you aren't the biggest fan of my ride-along thing, but I'd like to think I'm a pretty useful set of eyes and ears for you on these interviews. Can I mention that I am in the middle of an active murder investigation? I needed to see a witness alone because I wanted him to be open to me without any extra eyes and ears, useful though they may be." "So you're saying they are useful?" "I'm saying this isn't a time for you to personalize or be needy." She looked at him, just wanting to be with her, and had to admit being more cute than needy. Nicky found herself smiling. "And yes, sometimes they are useful." "All right. Just not every time, okay? We're in a good place. Let's not over-examine," he said. "Got some news about Pachenko," said Ochoa as he and Rayleigh came through the door. "Tell me he's on Rikers Island and can't get a lawyer. That would be good news," she said. "What have you got?" "Well, you called it," said Ochoa. "A guy fitting his description shoplifted half the first aid aisle at a Duane Reade in the East Village today." "Got surveillance vid, too." Rayleigh popped a DVD in his computer. "Positive ID in Pachenko?" she asked. "You tell me." The drugstore video was ghostly and jerky, but there he was, the big Russian filling a plastic bag with ointments and aloe, then ducking through the first aid section to help himself to wrapping tape and finger splints. "Dude's in bad shape. Remind me never to get in a fight with you," said Rayleigh. "Or to have you press my shirts," added Ochoa. They went back and forth like that, until somebody came up with a magic pill. Gallows humor was still the best coping mechanism for a cop. Otherwise, the job ate you alive. Normally, Nicky would have been right there taking shots with them, but she was too raw to laugh it off just yet. Maybe if she could see Pachenko shackled in the back of a van on his way to Ossining for the rest of his life, then she wouldn't still be smelling him, or feeling his skilled hands on her throat in her own home. Maybe then she could laugh. "Whoa, check out the finger. I think I'm going to yak," said Ochoa. Rayleigh added, "He can kiss off that piano scholarship to Juilliard." Rook's smart mouth was uncharacteristically silent. Nicky checked him out and caught him watching her with something like what she'd seen in his eyes at the poker table that night before, but magnified. She broke off, feeling the need to get clear of whatever this was, just like she had after he gave her the framed print. "All right, so that's definitely our man," she said, and moved away to contemplate the whiteboard. "And do I need to point out he's still in the city?" said Rook. She chose to ignore him. The fact was obvious and the worry useless. Instead, she turned to Rayleigh. "Nothing at all in your Guilford tape?" "I went over that puppy until I was cross-eyed. No way they came back through that lobby after they left. I also screened video of the service entrance. Nothing." "All right, we gave it a shot." "Screening that lobby video was totally the worst," said Rayleigh. "Like watching C-SPAN, only not as exciting." "Tell you what, then. I'll get you out in the real world. Why don't you and Ochoa drop in on Dr. Van Pelt's office and see if Kimberly Starr's alibi clears? And since it's a safe bet she's tipped off her one true love that we'll be checking—" "I know," said Ochoa. "Verify with his receptionist, nurses, and/or hotel staff, etc., yada, etc., yada." "Gosh, Detective," said Heat, "it's almost like you know what you're doing." Detective Heat stood at the whiteboard, and under the heading Guilford Surveillance Video wrote 2 red letters, NG. It must have been the angle she was writing at that brought on the pinching stiffness from the previous night's brawl. She let her shoulders drop and rolled her head in a slow circle, feeling the delicious edge of discomfort that told her she was still alive. When she was done, she circled Matthew's Mistress on the board, capped her marker, and yanked the magazine out of Rook's hands. "Want to take a ride?" she asked. They took the West Side Highway downtown, and even the river showed symptoms of heat strain. To the right, the Hudson looked as if it was too hot to move, and its surface lay there in surrender, all flat and dozy. The zone west of Columbus Circle was still a mess and would surely lead the 5 o'clock news. The erupting steam jet had been shut off, but there was a lunar-sized crater that would close West 59th for days. On the scanner, they listened to one of the NYPD Quality of Life Squad's report. They had busted a man for public urination who admitted he tried to get arrested so he could spend the night in air conditioning. "So the weather caused 2 eruptions that required police action," said Rook, which made Heat laugh and feel almost glad he was along. When she'd set up the meeting with Matthew Starr's former mistress, Morgan Donnelly asked if they could meet her at work, since that's where she spent most of her time. That fit the profile Noah Paxton had sketched of her when Nicky asked him about her in their conversation earlier that day. As was his way, once he opened up, Nicky's pen could hardly keep pace. In addition to revealing choice office nicknames, he'd called their romance the inter-office elephant in the conference room, and summed up Starr's not-so-secret mistress by saying, "Morgan was all brains, tits, and drive. She was the Matthew Starr ideal, work like crazy, screw like mad. Sometimes I'd picture them in bed with their Blackberries texting, 'Oh yeah, like that's' to each other between deals." So, with that in her head, when Nicky Heat parked the car at the business address off Prince Street in Soho Donnelly had given her, she had to double-check her notes to make sure she had the right place. It was a cupcake bakery. Her sore neck protested when she twisted to read the sign above the door. "Fire and icing?" she said. Rook quoted a poem. "Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice." He opened his car door and the heat rolled in. "Today I'm going with fire." "I still can't believe it," said Morgan Donnelly, as she sat down with them at a round cafe table in the corner. She unsnapped the collar flap of her crisp white chef's tunic and offered the stainless sugar caddy to Heat and Rook for their iced Americanos. Nicky tried to reconcile the Morgan the baker before her with the Morgan the marketing powerhouse Noah Paxton drew. There was a story there, and she would get it. The corners of Donnelly's mouth turned down, and she said, "You hear about things like this in the news, but it's never anybody you know." The girl came from behind the counter and set a sample plate of mini cupcakes in the center of the table. When she stepped away, Morgan continued, "I know getting involved with a married man doesn't make me look like the best person. Maybe I wasn't. But when it was happening, it seemed so right. Like in the middle of all the pressure of the job, there was this passion, this amazing thing that was just ours." Her eyes filled a little, and she swiped her cheek once. He'd studied her for tells. Too much remorse or not enough were red flags. There were others, of course, but those indicators formed the baseline for her. Nicky hated the term, but so far Morgan's reaction was appropriate. But the detective needed to do more than take her temp. As the ex of a murder victim, she had to be checked out, and that meant getting answers to two simple questions. Did she have a strong revenge motive? And did she stand to gain from the man's death? Life would be so much simpler if he could just have her check off boxes on a questionnaire and mail it in, but it didn't work that way, and now Nicky's job was to make this woman a little uncomfortable. "Where were you when Matthew Starr was killed? Say between 12:30 and 2:30 p.m.? She started throwing the high heat to catch Morgan off guard. Morgan took a moment and answered without any defensiveness. "I know exactly where I was. I was with the Tribeca film people for a tasting. I won a catering contract for one of their after-parties this spring, and I remember because the tasting went well and I was driving back here to celebrate that afternoon when I heard about Matthew." Nicky made a note and continued, "Did you and Mr. Starr have any contact after the affair ended?" "Contact? You mean did we still see each other?" "That or any contact at all." "No, although I did see him once a few months ago, but he didn't see me and we didn't talk." "Where was this?" "Bloomingdale's. At the lunch counter downstairs. I was going to get a tea and he was there." "Why didn't you speak to him?" "He was with someone." Nicky made a note. "Did you know her?" Morgan smiled at Nicky's perception. "No, I might have said hello to Matthew, but she had her hand on his thigh. They seemed preoccupied." "Can you describe her?" "Blonde, young, pretty, young." She thought a moment and added, "Oh, and she had an accent. Scandinavian, Denmark or Sweden maybe, I don't know." Nicky and Rook traded glances, and she could sense him looking over her shoulder as she wrote "Nanny" in her notes. "So otherwise no contact at all, then?" "No, when it was over, but it was very cordial." She looked down at her espresso, then up at Nicky and said, "Bullshit, it was painful as hell. But we were both grown-ups, we both went our ways. Life goes, well," she left that unfinished. "Let's go back to the end of your relationship. It must have been difficult in the office. Did he fire you when it was over?" "It was my decision to leave. Working together would be awkward for us, and I sure as hell didn't want to deal with the gossip residue." "But still, you had a big career there." "I had a big love there. At least I told myself it was. When that ended, I wasn't focused on my career so much." "I'd be angry as hell," said the detective. Sometimes the best way to ask a question was not to ask it. "Hurt and fragile, yes. Angry?" Morgan smiled. "It ended up for the better. A relationship like that, you know, the fun and convenient, going nowhere kind. I realized I was using that relationship to stay out of relationships, just as I was with my work. You know what I mean?" Nicky shifted uncomfortably in her chair and managed a neutral. "Uh-huh. At best it was a placeholder, and I wasn't getting any younger." Nicky shifted again, wondering how she had ended up as the one feeling uncomfortable. "Matthew was good to me, though. He offered me a huge chunk of money." Nicky snapped out of herself and back to the interview and made a note to check that out with Paxton. "How much did he give you?" "Nothing. I wouldn't accept it." "It's not like he would have missed it," said Rook. "But don't you see," she said to him, as if he never would, If I took his money, then that would be what it was all about. It wasn't like people said. It wasn't about rising to the top on my back with my legs in the air. Rook persisted. Still, nobody would have to know you took his money. I would, she said. And with those two words, Detective Heat closed her notebook. A carrot cupcake was screaming at her from that plate, and it had to be silenced. As Nicky peeled at the ruffles of the bottom wrapper, she nodded her head to the trendy bake shop and asked, What about all this? Not where I expected to find the infamous MBA on Red Bull. Morgan laughed. Oh, that Morgan Donnelly. She's around somewhere. Makes an appearance once in a while and turns my life nuts. She leaned forward over the table toward Nicky. The end of that affair 3 years ago turned out to be an epiphany. Before it came, I was getting hints, but I ignored them. For instance, some nights I'd stand there in my big old corner office up on the penthouse floor of the Star Point, one phone going, 2 lines on hold, and a dozen emails to answer. And I'd look below on the street and say to myself, Look at all those people down there, going home to somebody. Nicky was licking some buttercream frosting from her fingertip and stopped. But come on, a career woman at the top of your game? That must have been very satisfying, right? After Matthew, all I could think of was, what was I left with? And all the stuff that had passed me by while I was putting on the power suits and doing the career. You know, life. Well, here was the epiphany. One day I'm watching Good Morning America, and Emerald's on, and he was making pies, and it got me remembering when I was a kid how much I loved to bake. So there I was in my pajamas and Uggs, creeping up on 30, no job, no relationship, and let's face it, not getting much out of either one when I had them anyway, thinking, time to reboot. Nicky found her heart racing. She took a sip of her Americano and asked, So you just took the jump? No net, no regrets, no looking back? At what? I decided to follow my bliss. Of course, the price of bliss is a loan to the eyeballs, but it's working out. I started small. Hell, look around. I still am small. But I'm loving it. I'm even engaged. She held out her hand, which had no ring on it. It's lovely, said Rook. Morgan made a whoops face and blushed a little. I never wear it when I'm baking, but the guy who does my website, he and I are tying the knot this fall. I guess you never know where life's taking you, huh? Nicky reflected and, unfortunately, had to agree. As they headed uptown, Rook balanced a huge box of 24 cupcakes on his lap. He'd brought the car to a gentle stop at a red light, so his gift to the precinct break room wouldn't turn into a box of crumbs. So, Officer Rook, she asked, I haven't heard you to tell me to slap Morgan Donnelly in jail. What gives? Oh, she's got to be off the list. Because... Too happy. He nodded. Agreed. But, said Rook, you'll still check her alibi and whether Paxton cut her a fat goodbye check. That's right. And we have a surprise mystery guest to check out. The Nordic nanny. You're learning. Oh yeah, learning a lot. Those were very revealing questions. She watched him, knowing something was coming, especially when you finished asking about the case and started getting personal. Yeah? She had an interesting story, and I wanted to hear it. Huh. You sure didn't look like it. Rook waited until he saw the color come to her cheeks, and then he just stared straight ahead out the windshield with that stupid grin again. All he said was, Green. Hey, man, it's the thought that counts, said Rayleigh. Rook, Roach, and a number of detectives in uniforms were crowded in the precinct break room. Around the open fire and icing box Rook had lovingly cradled on the drive. The assortment of buttercream icings, whipped creams, and ganache had melted and run together into what would charitably be described as cupcake roadkill. No, it's not, from Ochoa. Man promised cupcakes. I don't want thought, I want a cupcake. I tell you, these were perfect when they left the bakery, said Rook. But the room was emptying around his good deed. It's the heat, it's melting everything. Leave 'em outside a little longer, I'll come back with a straw, said Ochoa. He and Rayleigh moved on to the bullpen. When they arrived, Detective Heat was updating the whiteboard. Filling up, said Rayleigh. It was always a mixed feeling at this point on an open homicide, when the satisfaction of seeing the board becoming populated with data was offset by the most salient fact. Nothing up there had brought a salve. But they all knew it was a process, and every bit they posted was a step closer to clearing the case. "So," Nicky said to her squad, "Morgan Donnelly's alibi checks with the Tribeca Film Commish." As Rook entered the room, eating a cupcake out of a paper cup with a spoon, she added, "For the sake of her cupcakes, I hope the heat wave breaks by April. Roach, you saw Kimberly Starr's cosmetic surgeon?" "Yeah, and I'm thinking of getting something ugly removed that's been bothering me for the past 2 years." Rayleigh paused and added, "Ochoa." "See, Detective Heat," said his partner, I give, and this is what I put up with all day." Then Ochoa went to his notes. "The widow's alibi checks. She had a last-minute booking for a consultation and showed up at 1:15. That squares with her departure from the ice cream parlor in Amsterdam at 1. Heat said, "Over to the east side in 15 minutes? She got there in a hurry." "Ain't no mountain high enough," said Rook. "All right," continued Nicky. "Mrs. Starr managed to tell us the truth about cheating on both her husband and Barry Gable with Dr. Boytox. But that's just her whereabouts. Check phone records from her on the dock for any calls to Mirica Pachenko just to button it all down." "Right," said Roach in unison, and they laughed. "See, I can't stay mad at you," said Ochoa. That evening darkness was trying to push through the soggy air outside the precinct on West 82nd when Nicky Heat stepped out carrying the Met Store box containing her John Singer Sargent print. Rook was standing at the curb. "I've got a car service coming. Why don't you let me give you a lift?" "That's all right. I'm fine, and thanks again for this. You shouldn't have." She started off toward Columbus on her way to the subway near the planetarium. "But you'll notice I'm keeping it. Night." She got to the corner, and Rook was beside her. "If you insist on proving how macho you are by walking, at least let me carry that. Good night, Mr. Rook." "Wait." She stopped, but didn't mask her impatience. "Come on. Pachenko's still at large. You should have an escort." "You? Who'll protect you?" "Not I." "Geez. A cop who uses proper grammar as a weapon. I'm rendered helpless." "Look, if you have any doubt I can take care of myself, I'll be more than happy to give you a demonstration. Is your health insurance current?" "All right. What if this is just my flimsy excuse to see your apartment? What would you say to that?" Nicky looked across the street and back at him. She smiled and said, "I'll bring in some pictures tomorrow," and crossed with the light, leaving him there on the corner. A half hour later, Nicky came up the steps from the R train onto the sidewalk at East 23rd and saw the neighborhood plunge into darkness as Manhattan finally threw in the towel and collapsed into a citywide blackout. At first a strange silence fell as hundreds of window air conditioners up and down the streets ground to a stop. It was as if the city were holding its breath. There was some ambient light from headlights on Park Avenue South. But the street lights and traffic lights were out, and soon came the angry horns as New York drivers competed for asphalt and right-of-way. Her arms and shoulders were aching when she turned onto her block. She set the sergeant print down on the sidewalk and leaned it carefully against a neighbor's wrought-iron gate while she opened her shoulder bag. The farther she got from the avenue, the darker it had become. Heat fished for her mini mag light and adjusted the tiny beam so she wouldn't take a header on uneven pavement or some dog crap. The eerie silence began to give way to voices. They floated in the darkness from above as apartment windows were thrust open, and she could hear over and over again the same words from different buildings. Blackout and flashlight and batteries. She startled at a nearby cough and shined her light on an old man walking his pug. "You're blinding me with that damn thing," he said as he passed, and she pointed the beam down at the ground. "Be safe," she said, but got no response. Nicky picked up her box in both hands and moved on toward her building with the mini-mag wedged between her palm and the carton, shining light a few feet ahead of each step. She was 2 doors from her building when a foot scraped on a pebble behind her and she stopped. Listened hard but heard no footsteps. Some idiot hollered "Awoo" from the rooftop across the street and dropped some flaming paper that spun a bright orange swirl until it burned itself out halfway down to the sidewalk. These were healthy reminders that this would be a good time to get off the street. At her front steps, Nicky set down the box again and bent to get her keys. Behind her came quickening footsteps, and then a hand touched her back. She whirled and threw a high backward circle kick that grazed Rook, and by the time she heard his "hey," it was too late to do anything but gain her balance and hope he didn't hit his head on the way down. "Rook," she said. "Down here." Nicky shined her light in the direction of his voice and spotlighted him sitting up in the sidewalk planter with his back against a tree trunk holding his jaw. She bent down to him. "Are you all right? What the hell were you doing?" "I couldn't see you. I bumped into you." "But why are you here?" "I just wanted to make sure that you ignored what I said and followed me." Always the savvy detective. He put one of his hands against the tree and the other on the sidewalk. "You might want to turn away. I am about to struggle. Pay no attention to the groaning." She didn't turn away, but put a hand under his arm to help him up. "Did I break anything?" she asked, and shined the flashlight on his face. His jaw was red and chafed from her foot. "Do this," she said, and shined the light on herself as she worked her jaw open and closed. She put the light on him, and he followed her instructions. "How's that?" "The humane thing may be just to put me down. You got a bullet on you?" "You're fine. You're lucky I only grazed you. You're lucky I signed that waiver against lawsuits when I started my ride-along." She smiled in the dark. "I guess we're both lucky." Nicky figured he must have heard the smile in her voice because he drew closer to her until there was only the slightest gap separating them. They stood there like that, not quite touching, but sensing each other's closeness in the dark of the hot summer night. Nicky started to sway, and then leaned ever so slightly toward him. She felt her breast brush softly against his upper arm. Then the bright light hit them. "Detective Heat," said the voice from the patrol car. She took one step back from Rook and shielded her eyes against the spotlight. "I am?" "Everything all right?" "Fine, he's—" She looked at Rook, who wasn't appreciating her pause while she struggled to define him. "With me." Nicky knew the score. As they lowered the beam out of her eyes, she pictured them meeting in Captain Montrose's office after she had left, and the call that went out. It was one thing to rib each other and play their game of too cool to care, but the precinct was family, and if you were one of their own and you were threatened, you could bet your badge they'd have your back. The gesture would have been so much more welcome if she hadn't had Jameson Rook on her hip. "Thank you, but this isn't necessary, really." "No sweat. We'll be here all night. You want us to show you upstairs?" "No," said Nicky a little more urgently than she'd intended. She continued more softly. "Thank you, I've got a—" She looked at Rook, who smiled until she said, "Flashlight." Rook lowered his voice. "Nice. Think I'll tell James Taylor I have his new song. You've got a flashlight." "Oh, don't be so— You know James Taylor?" "Heat?" "Yeah." "Got any ice up there in that apartment?" Nicky gave it a moment while he rubbed his sore jaw. "Let's go up and find out."